Joining me at this time is someone who is following the China-Japan story very closely. He's the award-winning national security reporter and senior editor of the Washington Free Beacon, Bill Gertz. Bill, welcome back.
Hi, Rick. Good to be on the show.
Bill, you're covering this Chinese-Japanese story closely. Please get us up to speed. What does it mean preparing for a short, sharp war?
Yeah, this was a recent panel discussion by a senior Navy intelligence officer who was at a San Diego conference where he talked about recent Chinese military exercises, something called Mission Action 2013, where they conducted some 40,000 troops involving air forces and ground forces. And the takeaway from that exercise was that this, according to this Captain Jim Fennell, was that China is preparing for a war with Japan. This is something that's been building up. It's clear going back to November when the Chinese declared this air defense zone over the East China Sea, which covers the Senkaku Islands. They're in this dispute over these islands, have large gas and oil reserves underneath, and the Chinese are really ratcheting it up. And this official, Captain Fennell, he is very concerned about the possibility that the Chinese will seize these islands as part of a military operation.
What's the reaction been in Japan?
Well, the Japanese have been trying to do the best they can. They really have no military to speak of. They have a small naval force and small ground forces, but they're very reliant on the United States. And unfortunately, the Obama administration has been sending mixed messages to the region. On the one hand, the Obama administration has said we're neutral in territorial and maritime disputes. And on the other hand, it's kind of given its quiet support for Japan, with whom the United States has a defense alliance. In other words, if Japan is attacked over these islands, the U.S. is obligated to defend Japan. And yet the Chinese are conducting, outside of the military threats, a very sophisticated influence operation to try to divide Japan from the United States.
Wow. Bill, you follow the nuances of national security events worldwide on a daily basis. What does this tell you about about America's prestige worldwide? We see what's going on in the Middle East with Vladimir Putin. Now this story you're bringing to our attention. What does it tell us?
A lot of wrong-headed policies on the part of the Obama administration. I've seen this movie before, back in the 70s when Jimmy Carter was president. He welcomed the Ayatollah Khomeini as a dissident democratizer for Iran, and look what happened there. Look at how that's turned out. Now we see a similar kind of thing with the Obama administration, conciliatory policies that project weakness. And I agree with the former Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld, who said weakness is provocative. It provokes other powers into taking mistaken actions that could lead to war. It's a very dangerous kind of policy. And
it's sort of, ties into that comment you just referred, quoting Donald Rumsfeld. That's the point I was trying to make, that, okay, it's okay to weaken our military if you believe that, but who do you want to fill that vacuum? And another way of saying it is that weakness is provocative.
Yes. And you have al-Qaeda growing around the world, especially in North Africa and the Arabian Peninsula and in other parts. In fact, there was just a report released today by a Pentagon-sponsored study that said the Taliban is increasing in Afghanistan, and al-Qaeda remains entrenched in there, despite all of the efforts that the United States has made over the last few years.
I want to come back to a comment you made, because it was a short, simple sentence, but it carried a walloping punch, so to speak. You said China is trying to separate Japan from the United States. What does that mean exactly? Because that has all sorts of big meaning in my mind right now.
Yeah, this goes back to about a year and a half ago when the Japanese, in order to try and settle the island dispute over these islands, the Senkakus, they announced that they were nationalizing them. And they did that because they didn't want the islands in private hands. There were some private owners for these islands. That triggered anti-Japanese riots in China. The Chinese, since that time, have been stepping up the pressure on Japan. The way they've been doing this is by focusing on Japan's World War II past, trying to portray Japan as a militarist state. This is just not the case. And the Japanese have been flummoxed by this influence operation. They should be telling the world that, look, we're a modern democratic state with a high technology economy, and yet they haven't been able to make that case. Again, the United States should be able to help them with that. But instead, the Chinese are driving the narrative, and they're trying to split the United States from Japan.
Bill Gertz, you know, you and I are racists, and so is everyone else that opposes big government. It sounds like China is stealing a page from the Obama handbook.
Well, yeah, you might say that. Yeah, the way the Obama administration approaches these things, like I said, they support all of America's enemies, and they diss all of America's friends.
And, of course, and I'm referring to the fact that China is playing on the past of Japan in terms of World War II. Real quick, I want to ask you a philosophical question. It wasn't that many years ago when capitalism began to be introduced to the Chinese society, and many of us on the right felt it's inevitable that a free society follows. It's inevitable that we see democracy. Do you think that perhaps that inevitability will occur in China someday, or we're going to see the coexistence?
No, in fact,
go ahead.
No, it's not working. The idea that if you trade with China, it will become a democratic state is not working. In fact, China is becoming more repressive. The current leader, Xi Jinping, is reverting more to Maoism, and we know where that led, to the deaths of 70 million Chinese. So it's a very dangerous situation there. What China needs is democracy, some form of democracy. They need to transition. They have a semi-socialist, semi-capitalist economic system with a Soviet-style political system, and that's a dangerous mix.
Wow. Bill Gertz, always insightful, and a pleasure to have you on the show, Washington Free Beacon. Thanks for getting us up to speed on this, troubling and important story.
Thanks for having me on.
All right, Bill Gertz.